The sound came first, a sharp, piercing snap, like a whip cracking across the morning stillness. Then, a blinding jolt of yellow light. A voice barked through the air, full of fury and control. "You asked for it!" The man it was aimed at didn't fight. He never had. His hands were open, palms slightly raised, not in protest, but in confusion. Then the electricity hit. His back arched as his knees gave way, the green fabric of his shirt folding under the force of the fall. His body struck the earth with a thud that stole the air from the park around him. It had been quiet just moments before. A boy riding his bike slowed to a stop, eyes wide. His mother reached to cover his ears too late. A dog barked once and fell silent. The squirrels scattered. The man on the ground, old, gray-haired, face lined with the weathering of time, groaned once, curling slightly into himself. His veteran's cap, a soft green with a faded United States Army emblem, rolled away into the grass. The badge on the officer's chest caught the morning sun, gleaming cold. A few yards away, an elderly couple clutched each other, stunned. A jogger paused, then pulled out his phone. Another woman, in her mid-60s, stood frozen with her bag of groceries half lowered, lettuce tumbling out onto the sidewalk. There was no siren, no emergency. Just the silence of disbelief beginning to settle over the park like fog. Then came the murmurs, quiet at first, like wind in dry leaves. Whispers moving through those gathered like a ripple across still water. "That's David Cole." A man said it without raising his voice, as if saying it louder might make it untrue. He didn't move yet, but his eyes did. They locked onto the officer still holding the yellow taser, hand shaking from adrenaline or doubt. Behind him, past the oak tree at the park's edge, boots began to move. Slow, steady, not charging, not running, just walking, one after another, like memory coming to life. A handful of older men, weathered faces, postures straight from years of service that had never quite left them. They didn't need uniforms. Their walk said everything. David Cole still lay in the grass, blinking up into the sky with damp eyes and a tightening chest. His lips moved faintly. "I was just cleaning his plaque." The wind lifted the edge of a small flag tucked beside a stone near the bench, half hidden by ivy, half forgotten by the city. The name on it would soon matter more than anyone realized. But for now, only the silence carried meaning, and the movement of boots. David Cole rose early, as he always did, not out of habit, but out of respect. The first light of day deserved stillness, not because it was sacred, but because it was honest. His joints ached when he sat up, the bones in his knees clicking softly like an old mechanism waking from sleep. A faded flannel shirt hung nearby, sleeves rolled, collar softened by years. He reached for it carefully, pausing only to glance toward the mantel. A photograph waited there, framed in plain pine. His wife, Marjorie, smiling in a summer dress beside their old Ford. He whispered to it every morning, "Another day, honey." No answer, of course, but the silence had softened over time. Not empty, just quiet. His boots waited at the door, resting beside a canvas bag with frayed edges and oil-darkened seams. Inside were tools, not new, not polished, but true. A rag-wrapped wrench, a rust-streaked screwdriver, a tin of brass polish. These were not for repairs in his home, but for one solemn task that had become his own form of prayer, the park. By 7:30, he was already walking. Slow, steady. The path knew his steps. He brought birdseed in a small pouch, scattered lightly by the base of the trees. The doves recognized him, flapping down from above with soft coos and tilted heads. David never rushed. He stooped with care, offering crumbs to the ground, brushing debris from the memorial stone as he went. The plaque sat low beneath a bench, weather-worn, the name etched by hand years ago. Morris E. Bell, friend, brother, saved, but not forgotten. David had placed it there himself, with quiet permission from the park's groundskeeper. Few noticed it. Fewer knew the name. He wiped it clean now with a folded cloth. the edges trembling in his fingers. A small American flag stood nearby, its pole leaning slightly, caught between stubborn roots. David straightened it gently, not because he had to, because no one else would. Just as he was folding the cloth, a jogger brushed past him fast and close, barely missing his shoulder. "Watch it, old man," the voice snapped behind him. David didn't respond. He didn't flinch. He only returned the cloth to the bag and pressed down the corners. He'd heard worse, in war, in peacetime, in the years after when his name didn't mean anything anymore. Later that morning, he stopped by the diner, a quiet place, faded menus and small booths. He ordered a black coffee and a single egg, sunny side up. When it came time to pay, he pulled out coins slowly, counting them into his palm. A young man behind him sighed loudly, shifting impatiently. David offered a polite nod, said nothing, and placed the last nickel on the counter. The cashier didn't smile. Outside, the sun was higher now, warming the sidewalks and the backs of parked cars. David walked on, still headed toward the park. He noticed city workers taping orange flags to stakes near the edge of the trees. Landscaping, they said. Cleanup for the spring. One of them pointed toward the memorial spot. "Guess we'll have to move that little rock thing. What even is it?" David turned, quietly. He didn't speak, just knelt beside the bench, placed a palm on the stone as if shielding it from casual hands. "It's not just a rock," he said, to no one in particular. His day continued in silence. He returned home only to pick up his extra cloth and a bottle of polish. The stone needed a fresh shine. His knees would hurt for it later, but he didn't care. His duty was not something he put down when it became uncomfortable. That was the difference between remembering and honoring. He made one last stop, the small drawer by his front window. Inside was a worn patch from his uniform, United States Army Rangers Vietnam War. He folded it in half, tucked it into his shirt pocket, and walked once more toward the park. That's when it began. The call, the command, the jolt, the peace he had kept for so long, disrupted not by war, but by ignorance. The taser had stopped crackling, but its echo lingered in the air like a burned-out engine. David Cole lay in the damp grass, his back arched slightly, knees drawn in, face turned to the side where the blades met the dirt. His hand twitched once, then again. Not from fear, from electricity still tracing the memory of its path along the nerves. The officer stood over him, stance wide, shoulders locked, eyes sharp with that look that comes not from evil, but from certainty, from the kind of authority that doesn't question itself until it's too late. "You're resisting," the officer barked again. "Hands where I can see 'em." David groaned, not in rebellion, but in confusion. His voice was a gravel whisper. I was just tending the plaque." He tried to raise his arm, the left one, slower than the right, but the effort sent a flash of pain down his shoulder. His breathing was ragged, not from panic, from age, from the cold shock his heart had just endured. Still, he tried, because men like him always tried. The crowd was growing now, not by numbers, but by awareness. Passers-by slowed. Phones were already out, though not everyone was recording. Some were simply watching, caught in that tension between disbelief and responsibility. "Is he okay?" someone muttered near the park bench. A mother pulled her child gently to her side. The boy whispered, "He didn't do anything," but the mother only hushed him and looked away. Another man spoke louder. "That's David Cole. He built that memorial himself." The name began to ripple, not shouted but repeated. David Cole. David Cole. Like the echo of a name across granite. The officer, Jason Jensen, his badge number gleaming bright, turned to the man who'd spoken. "Back off. This is an active situation." Another woman stepped forward, no older than 30, a teenage park employee by the color of her green shirt and the laminated badge that read, "Grounds Volunteer." "Sir," she said, quiet but clear, "he's allowed to be here. That memorial stone's registered. It's on our books." Officer Jensen didn't look at her. He didn't need to. His voice cut through the tension like a cleaver. "This doesn't concern you." David tried again to rise. The taser wires still lay loose beside him, one barbed end caught in the hem of his shirt. He placed a hand to the earth and pushed, trembling under the effort. Dirt pressed beneath his palm, damp and cold. He could feel the heartbeat in his own fingertips. Fast, out of rhythm. "I served," he said, half to the grass, half to the sky. This was for Morris, just Morris. The name meant nothing to Officer Jensen, but it meant everything to the men beginning to appear. One stood now near the tree line, blue jeans, a black vest, and a patch that read, United States Marine Corps, not because it was trendy, but because he earned it. Another appeared near the fountain, gray beard, cane in hand, eyes narrowed not in threat, but in sorrow. They didn't run. They didn't shout. They just stood, like shadows that had chosen to stay. "Let him go," someone said softly. "He kept that plaque clean for 20 years, another added. "Not the city, him." David had managed to sit up. His knees were bent beneath him, and his hands rested in his lap, like old tools he wasn't sure still worked. The sun had moved slightly behind the trees now, casting long lines across the sidewalk and over his slumped shoulders. The memorial plaque, still partly covered in ivy, shimmered faintly in the light. A man in the crowd stepped forward again, slowly, measured. His hands were empty, his shirt tucked in. He spoke to the officer without raising his voice. "Young man, I know you're doing what you think is right, but that's David Cole, United States Army Ranger. He served in Vietnam. He earned the right to be here." Officer Jensen's grip on the taser relaxed, slightly, but his eyes darted, unsure whether to double down or back away. Behind him, more people had gathered. Some stood with hands clasped in front of them, others with arms crossed, not in rebellion, in solidarity. And David, still catching his breath, reached to where his cap had fallen. His fingers brushed the brim, lifting it slowly. The park was silent again, but not empty. The jungle was a living thing, not metaphorically, not poetically, but in the way that breath and blood belong to beasts. Every inch of it pulsed, dripped, crawled. The leaves overhead sagged under the weight of rain that had not yet fallen, and the earth squelched beneath every footstep, like a wound being pressed open. David Cole, then barely 22, moved with care, his rifle slung behind him, his arms beneath the shoulders of a man who was heavier than he'd ever been in life. Morris Bell, friend, squad mate, the man who'd once made him laugh in the dead of a monsoon and who now lay limp in David's grasp. Morris had taken shrapnel along the left leg, a twisted ribbon of torn fabric and blackened blood. The bandage had already soaked through twice. They had used the last of the gauze 2 ridgelines back. "Come on, Morris. Talk to me." David's breath came short and raw. His boots sank deep into the muddy slope, and each step forward felt like a betrayal of gravity. Leeches clung to his socks. Mosquitoes clouded his eyes. But he kept moving, because the alternative was unthinkable. "You leave me, Cole," Morris groaned, his voice barely a rasp. "You freeze quiet, but you don't die on me." David shifted his weight and dragged them both another few paces. The trees above cracked and whispered as though some ancient spirit were watching with narrowed eyes. The map was gone, lost when Rodriguez fell behind the ridge. They had veered west, he was almost certain, toward the trail that led to Firebase Echo. At least, it had the last time anyone had drawn a map. David paused for a moment behind a fallen log. His back burned, his thighs shook. His hands were trembling from the weight of the body in his arms. Not lifeless, but heavy with the silence of a man losing strength. Morris opened his eyes, pale, unfocused. "Why are you still carrying me?" he murmured. David leaned in, forehead resting briefly against his friend's. "Because the world doesn't end here. Not for you." Far in the distance, a Huey chop echoed like war drums. Distant, faint, but real. David turned them toward the sound. He bent low and pressed onward, the vines clawing at his sleeves, the air thick with the scent of wet rot, oil, and blood. There was a rhythm to his steps now, half drag, half stumble. His vision blurred once, but he blinked it clear. The rain began then. It didn't fall so much as arrive all at once, like a curtain pulled down from the sky. The jungle grew slick. Vision narrowed, every noise drowned beneath the roar of falling water. David kept walking, kept dragging, kept whispering to a man who no longer responded, until the trees parted, until the faint glow of fire barrels caught in the mist, until the shape of a helmet appeared beyond the tree line, and then another, and then a call shouted over the storm. "Ranger, we got you! Over here!" David collapsed forward, Morris still in his grasp. Strong arms took them both. The last thing David remembered before the dark came rushing up was the sound of boots on gravel and someone calling, "Medic incoming!" He didn't cry that night. He couldn't. Not until later. Not until the silence returned. And even then, it wasn't for what he lost. It was for what he promised. He would never let Morris Bell be forgotten. Not while breath still rose in his chest. The scene had not shifted. Not yet. Officer Jason Jensen still stood over David Cole, hand resting on his holster, breath quickened with the adrenaline of assumed authority. His voice rang sharp in the open morning air. "I said move back! This is official law enforcement protocol!" But something in the air had changed. Not loud, not sudden, but tangible, like the temperature dropping before a storm. All around the park, people who had frozen moments earlier began to stir. Eyes locked, hands clenched. Words passed softly, barely above whispers. Then, a sound. Steady, singular. Boots. One pair. A man stepped forward. He was tall, perhaps in his 60s, with close-cropped grey hair and a dark blue jacket embroidered with the seal of the United States Navy. His hands were empty, but his presence was heavy. He said nothing. He simply stood between Officer Jensen and the man on the ground. Jensen took a step forward, then paused. A second man joined, this one with a patch on his shoulder that read 82nd Airborne Division, weathered and sun-faded. Then a third, a woman, wrinkled hands but sharp eyes. Her cane tapped softly on the stone path as she took her place beside the others. They formed a line. No shouting, no weapons. Just stillness, posture, the kind of presence that does not ask for respect, but reminds you it was earned. The officer's voice rose again, more brittle this time. "Clear this area now. I will escalate if necessary." From the line, a voice answered. "He served before you were born. You don't get to erase that." Another voice followed, softer, from someone in the growing ring of bystanders. "He taught my boy how to fix his first engine." A man near the benches added. "He cleaned this park every morning before sunup. No one paid him. He just did it." More people began to move. A mother pushed a stroller to the edge of the path, paused, and simply placed her hand over her heart. A man in a trucker cap took off his hat and held it to his chest. The circle widened, grew fuller. Not a mob, but a congregation. Veterans, friends, neighbors. Some stood with folded arms. Others knelt gently by David, checking his breathing, placing a blanket across his shoulders. Jensen backed up half a step. His eyes scanned the crowd. No backup, no partner. Just a rising wave of memory and reverence standing before him. Immovable. David stirred. His fingers flexed, finding grass. A quiet groan passed through his teeth as he struggled upright. A hand reached down, firm, calloused, and helped him sit. His cap was returned by a boy no older than 8, who'd picked it up from the lawn. The child stood silently as David reached for it. The old man's hand trembled as he brushed it off and placed it back on his head, adjusting it slowly, as if aligning something deeper than cloth. One woman, arms crossed tightly over a faded Marine sweatshirt, whispered aloud, "He saved a man's life in the jungle. Ask him how." Another man replied, "No need. He already did more than enough." Jensen opened his mouth as if to say something, but the words died in his throat. Instead, he lowered his gaze. One more veteran joined the line, limping slightly. He took position not with defiance, but with calm, seasoned resolve. They didn't need to raise their voices. Their silence spoke generations. And in that quiet resistance, honor was remembered. The wind shifted slightly, as if in acknowledgement. The leaves above rustled with soft friction, and the air no longer carried the tension of confrontation. It now held something older, something deeper. David Cole's knees wobbled as he rose, not by force but with help. Two veterans at either side lifted him slowly, carefully, as if raising a flag that had fallen but was never forgotten. His legs shook, but he straightened as best he could. His face, creased with age and pain, held firm. A young woman knelt beside him, adjusting the old blanket over his shoulders. Her hand paused for a moment on his forearm, not for assistance, but for respect. There was no need for words. In moments like these, silence was sacred. A boy with thick glasses approached quietly. In his hands was a crumpled sheet of white construction paper. A child's drawing, red stripes, a blue square filled with stars, and the words, scribbled in big shaky letters, "Thank you for your bravery, Mr. Soldier." David took it in his hands and looked at it as if it were a medal. He nodded once, lips pressed together. The crowd had not dispersed. In fact, more had arrived. Some from homes nearby, others from storefronts across the street. They lined the edges of the park now, not as spectators, but as witnesses. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder, forming not just a wall, but a shield. From the parking lot, a man opened the back of his car. He pulled out a folded flag, once bright, now faded, and raised it high above his head. Another joined him, hoisting a standard bearing the insignia of the United States Army. Then the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard. They planted themselves like oak trees, and in that quiet stillness, something beautiful unfolded. A woman, wearing a scout leader uniform, ushered a group of children forward. Each child held a small pin, gold stars, silver leaves, embroidered patches. Without a word, they placed them at the base of the plaque David had tended for years. Some saluted, others simply bowed their heads. David's hand found the brim of his cap. He adjusted it gently, as if preparing for roll call. His voice was raspy when it came, but carried. "I didn't fight to be remembered. I fought so we wouldn't forget each other." There was no applause, no cheers, only stillness. And that was enough. Someone took a photo, not posed, not directed, just a moment. Veterans encircling one of their own, civilians behind them in reverence, children near the earth that held a name. A snapshot of memory. It would be shared thousands of times before the sun set. But in that instant, it was just for them. Officer Jensen had long since stepped back, no longer shouting, no longer in command. He stood now with his hands at his sides, head tilted downward, lips slightly parted. No one looked at him. No one needed to. His presence had faded like noise in a cathedral. The circle held, and at the center stood David, not proud but steady, not angry but whole. The kind of man who'd knelt in jungles to carry the wounded, the kind who kept promises, even if the world no longer listened, the kind you don't erase. You remember. By morning, the park no longer whispered about what had happened. It spoke clearly. City Hall issued its first statement before sunrise. A measured, somber paragraph. "We are investigating the incident involving Officer Jason Jensen and will take all necessary steps to ensure this community remains a place of honor and safety, especially for those who have served our country." It was not enough, but it was a beginning. Officer Jensen was quietly placed on administrative reassignment. Street duty was no longer an option. He would undergo full de-escalation training, this time under the instruction of veterans. There were no press conferences, no lights flashing. But his absence on patrol routes did not go unnoticed. In homes across town, quiet nods of approval were exchanged over breakfast tables. Not satisfaction, but a sense of order being restored. At the park, a city crew arrived just after noon. They did not speak. They came with new posts, new markers. A bronze plate was installed beside the original plaque David had polished so many times. Its inscription was simple: dedicated to those who served and those who remember. The little plaque that once risked removal was now protected by municipal order, its coordinates logged, its presence permanent. That afternoon, the town council voted, unanimously, to approve funding for a Veterans Honor Stewardship program. It would include educational walks through historic areas, youth engagement in civic spaces, and care for every plaque, flag, and memorial rooted in service. David Cole's name was listed as honorary consultant. Across town, the photo had already made its way to every screen, not through sensational headlines, but through quiet shares. A man in Wyoming captioned it, "That's the kind of wall we need more of." A woman in Georgia wrote, "My daddy would have stood there too." On a school bulletin board, the picture was printed and pinned between two lesson plans. Beneath it, "Courage never retires." And in one quiet diner on the edge of town, the waitress who had once sighed at David's slow coins brought him a slice of pie. On the house, with a folded napkin that read, in shaky handwriting, "Thank you for the kind of silence that teaches louder than words." 3 days later, the morning broke gently, a soft gold crawling over rooftops and dew-laced hedges. David Cole walked without hurry, his steps slow, not because of pain, but because nothing good should ever be rushed. In one hand, a folded cloth. In the other, a tin thermos, the kind he used back in the motor pool days, dented and matte from 1,000 sunrises. The park welcomed him as it always had. The maples bowed just slightly in the breeze. The grass shimmered under early light. Pigeons stirred by the memorial. Feathers puffed with morning chill. He reached the plaque, now bolted, polished, protected, and knelt without sound. With the cloth in hand, he cleaned the brass gently, swiping in circles, not for any audience, not for any gratitude, but because this mattered. Then, he placed a small bunch of white wildflowers beside it. Nothing store-bought, just a few blossoms picked on the way, delicate, imperfect, real. He sat on the nearby bench, the one worn smooth from seasons past, and poured coffee into the thermos lid. He sipped slowly, the steam rising like a memory that had learned how to exhale. He watched a father at the other end of the field, steadying a small boy on a wobbly red bicycle. The boy teetered, laughed, fell, tried again. The father called, "You've got it, keep going." David smiled faintly. That kind of effort, that kind of guidance, it was what he believed in all along. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The wind nudged the little American flag planted in the ground. It lifted, stretched, and cast a long shadow across the grass. The shadow touched David's boots, then the bench, then the plaque. It was as if the whole place remembered, not just what had happened, but why it mattered. David looked down at the flowers once more, then up, toward a sky that had seen too many men forgotten. He whispered, barely above breath, "We're still watching out." And then, with effort, he stood, not to leave the past behind, but to carry it forward, one quiet step at a time. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you're watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.